To bid or not to bid? That is today's question. Auctions can be daunting and it's understandable to want to avoid them. But if you're in an auction area, you might find that all the best properties go to auction. So to avoid auctions means buying elsewhere or buying something that isn't great just because it feels easier.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about auctions. It is hard to believe that the last time we did a dedicated episode about auctions was back in September 2021. Shame on us.
Because that was a long time ago.
That was episode 27 and we're up to 170 something now. And that's when online auctions were a thing. So God almighty, things have changed. And
haven't they?
And auction is one of my pet favourite subjects as well. I can't believe that I haven't harped on about it. So there you go. You're going to be in for a treat today.
We do wind it into other episodes. It's just that we haven't dedicated an episode to auctions for a long time.
There you go. Okay, before we get into the nitty-gritty of auctions and whether or not you should go to auction, Meighan has a special house in the video behind her. This looks absolutely ridiculous. So if you don't watch this on YouTube, maybe you want to tune in. Have a look.
Have a quick look. This is hilarious.
What the hell?
I return to the fun of the Airbnb OMG category. Now, this is, if you're not watching, it looks like a cow with a big pink eye. It's hilarious.
It's really
described
weird.
as a unique place to stay. The cow shed in Suffolk is a mix between camping, glamping, and a caravan, says the Airbnb listing.
Yeah. I think I'd give that a miss.
Very
just
rustic
quietly.
inside too, by the way.
It's probably no indoor toilet as far as I'm concerned. And if it is, it'd be too close to everything else. Yuck. I don't think, not for me. All right. Now, this is, as we do like to ask questions based on, often we trawl other Facebook pages and we like to look at the questions that first home buyers are asking. And this is one that It was a really interesting question because it says, to bid or not to bid on an auction property? I've always been told to be wary of bidding at auction because you aren't able to get pest and building reports, etc., done before financially committing. However, there's a unit in my ideal location that looks amazing. Seen in person, however, I'm no building expert. Going up for auction, they won't accept an offer prior to auction either. I don't know if I should bid or not. So we thought, let's really get into what...
It is such a good question.
It's a great question.
Really, really good question because... it prompted us to go back to the basics with you as a listener so that you don't see auctions as a reason not to buy. There's lots of reasons not to buy, but method of sale is not a reason not to buy.
Exactly right.
We will step you through the process. Not today in depth, but at least we're going to help you understand that you can get educated enough to feel confident when you do go to an auction. They're daunting and it's understandable you might want to avoid them, but you can't avoid them en masse.
No. Well, you can if you are buying in Perth or if you're buying
in non-auction area. Yeah.
If you're buying in regional, Tasmania, I don't think they do too many auctions. Lots of regional areas don't do any auctions. But it's becoming increasingly something like I was talking to buyers agents up in Newcastle the other week, and they were saying that there's a lot of auctions happening in Newcastle.
Yes.
And before it used to just be Sydney and Melbourne, and certainly Brisbane, you're finding there's in certain areas, certain types of property.
Certain agents, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's certain agents that really understand that there's so much psychology around the auction process. And the auction process is about taking the seller and the buyer through a psychological journey to arrive at an outcome, right? So there's only certain agents that get that and know how to do it well.
It is a process. And when I was a sales agent, we sold predominantly by auction. So it's a process that I'm very, very familiar with, both as a seller and as a buyer. And it's obviously why I wrote a book, because I find the whole thing fascinating. And in fact, my other podcast, The Elephant in the Room, our very first episode was interviewing a behavioural psychologist all about the psychology of what's going on at auction, right? So there's a lot
Go back and listen to that one. I mean, that's a long time ago. You've been doing that podcast for a long time, but it's a great episode.
2018. We might pop the link in the show notes. How's that?
Yeah.
So this is fascinating stuff, and being aware of it gives you power as a buyer, you know?
Yep. Now, we talk about different methods of sale, and it's important to differentiate between the main two methods of sale. There's just sort of three, but the main two methods of sale that you'll probably come across as a first-time buyer are public auction, which is what we're talking about today, and private treaty. So just get used to those two types of terminology. Private treaty is sort of that idea of, depending on which state you're in, you make an offer. It might be verbal, it might be in writing, it might be actually on a contract, again, depending on which state you're in, and you negotiate. The agent negotiates between the buyer and the seller. And through that negotiation, adjustments to prices, maybe conditions in some states, you might arrive at an agreed price, and a contract is signed by everybody, and that private treaty results in a contract being formed on the property. Sometimes unconditional, sometimes conditional on certain conditions, depending on how the contract's been written. So that's predominantly, in many locations, the way that you might end up buying a property. But it doesn't mean that you should completely ignore or preclude auctions, which is a public process of negotiation that's quite different to private treaty. So, Veronica, let's talk through now that method of sale being auction, public auction. Why would an owner and or an agent choose to go down the path of having a public auction?
So typically, the way it would be in an area which is very auction oriented is just the way that most things are done, right? But the reality is that where it first started was when you would look at a property that they didn't really know what the price was. They didn't really know what ultimately would sell for because it's scarce or unique, or there's something about it that's really popular, and they know that lots of people would fight over it. So in a pure sense, you would choose auction as a method of sale in a situation where you felt that it was hard to pinpoint exactly what it's worth, and they want to take it to market and let the market determine that. There's another reason why some people in some markets might choose auction, and that is because it might be a deceased estate where you've got a court order that's the way it has to be sold, for argument's sake, or there's some family law court situations where it has to be put to public auction. So sometimes there's a legal requirement, but generally speaking, it really is about letting the market determine what the property is worth, right? And so that...
And can I just get on to that point, the market being the buyers?
Yes.
So it's about letting the buyers, through competition, determine what the price of the property is, rather than the agent giving an indication as to what the owner might want or what they think it's worth.
Yeah. So in private treaty, of course, they put in a typical sense, they put an asking price on it. The buyers say, that's too much, or that's cheap, and offer accordingly, right? And so with auction, the idea is that, and in all states except for Queensland, the agent can give a price guide. They don't always choose to give a price guide because they have the option not to, but most of the time they will give a price guide. And then the buyers, basically start to think, well, how much more than that am I prepared to pay? Because usually the property is going to sell for more than the price guide, but not always, because sometimes they make a mistake and they actually overquote it. Yeah. But the thing is, the idea being they want to build competition. So this is where buyers often go absolutely wrong when they are looking at an auction property. They'll look at the price guide that the agent tells them, they'll add 10%, or they'll add 50 grand, or they'll add whatever magic number they've decided they're going to add to it, and they'll think, is that worth it or isn't it? And if they think it's worth it, they'll go to auction and they'll be thinking, well, that's what they have to pay. But there's an inherent problem with that approach, and that is what often gets buyers unstuck.
Yeah, and that's not really understanding what it's worth.
Exactly.
And the big thing that we really harp on about, I mean, we harp on about a lot, let's be honest. We're banging on about all sorts of things with first-time buyers. But, we really want people to understand that there is a process to go through to work out what a property is worth. And it isn't asking the agent, it isn't asking your parents, it isn't asking your friends, it isn't looking at what else is for sale and getting price guides off things that are for sale, because no one's actually bought that yet. So they haven't actually worked out what the price of that property actually is. It's looking at sold prices. Now, we have a free course that you can do, to help you work out what a property is worth, how to price a property using an appropriate methodology. So it's actually removing yourself from any kind of indications that you're getting from the agent, any kind of indications you're getting from advertising, and saying, what is this actually worth? And using that as the way to help you set your limit. Now, we've gone a little bit too far first, but one of the reasons that we wanted to go to this pricing thing is if you're looking at a property that's going for auction and you think, I don't even know if I can afford it, the first thing you need to work out is it kind of in your budget? Is it possible that you might be able to afford this property when you look at what people have paid for other similar properties? And that can help you work out whether it's worth spending the time and money that you need to do the due diligence that you need to do before you commit yourself to an auction or even set your price limit.
Yeah, because that's where people go wrong. They are all full of hope because the agent will they'll quote as low as they can get away with. That's
There's
the fact
a saying
of it.
actually when I was an auction agent, I was taught the saying, which is quote it low, watch it go, quote it high, watch it die.
Yep.
Okay, so that is some of that that excitement that we feel as buyers when we see something that looks a bit cheap and we think, oh, that's so much better than everything else I've seen. And it applies to property as well. But if it's overquoted and you think, oh God, that's way too expensive, you won't even engage with it.
No. And that's what they want to avoid. They want to avoid buyers going, no, that's too much. They want buyers thinking they've all got the opportunity to buy that property. It's all fuel for the fire. They'll turn up, they'll bid, they'll compete with each other, and somebody's going to rise to the top of the cream rises to the top.
Someone will be the highest bidder. Yep.
Someone's going to be the highest bidder. They're going to buy the property. And sometimes, and so this is where and it's not just first home buyers get caught out by this either. This is something that anybody who is not familiar with local property values can get very easily caught out by. This is one of the big complaints about underquoting, because people go and spend money building pest inspection reports, strata reports, etc. And then they're
solicitors' advice on contracts.
Yeah, and I never had a hope of getting it. The first bid was more than my limit. And it's like, well, there's a really, we say to you all the time, it is your responsibility as buyers to arm yourself with the right information. And pricing a property is, I don't think, there's so many critical things that you need to arm yourself with, but working out what it's worth, it's like 101.
Yes. Apart from, it's not, because step one is actually building your team and your support crew. So, knowing what you can pay comes first, but working out when you found a property, is it kind of within my range? That's pretty important before you worry about how long, have I got to get a building and pest inspection, and what solicitor will I speak to about getting a contract reviewed?
It's getting everything in the right order. That's what we keep talking about. Yeah. So knowing what it's worth, not what's the agent quoting, not even what is your budget, like can you afford, it's what's the property really worth? And then you think, can I afford it, right?
Yeah.
And you got to take wishful thinking out of the equation.
Yeah, it's an important part of setting your limit as well. So if it is a property that is going to fall in your range, you've done your research, done the evaluation, and you've done all your due diligence, huge and large number of steps to do in due diligence prior to purchasing under auction conditions, because you have got no way of getting out if you are the highest bidder and you purchase that property under auction conditions. So really important due diligence, and of course we go through that in depth in the course. But if you're going to get to the point of actually saying, all right, this is the one that I want, and you need to set your limit, you need to really use that pricing information to set your limit before you are put in the emotional state of fear of missing out during an auction. Because I tell you, agents are experts at putting pressure on buyers to get them to bid at auctions. That is their job. Their job is to get you to pay the highest amount of money to secure the highest sale price for their seller. That's their job, right? You can't deny them. If they're doing that well, well done, they're doing their job. And
exactly.
if you're not a person, it's also a time for self-reflection too. If you don't feel that you could stand in a public auction with someone putting pressure on you to bid, that's the time to outsource it. That's the time to get a professional to stand there and bid for you. And you can actually just get a buyer's agent, a professional buyer's agent, to bid for you only at an auction. It's a very inexpensive way of saving yourself potentially thousands and thousands of dollars.
As long as you give them good guidance on their limit and your price, because if you give them bad guidance on that, they are hamstrung and you've just wasted
can't do
money.
Anything with it.
They can't do anything with it, right? So this is why you understanding value and understanding your limit for that property is really important. What I see all the time is people turn up to auction and they've set a limit, all right, but the limit is what they would like to pay, not what they would pay if they have to, under pressure, under competition. And that's the difference, because everybody goes in with wishful thinking, well, I'd be happy if I got it for that. And they bid quite confidently up to that limit. And then the minute it goes over that, they're like, oh, now I have to decide when the pressure's on, the time is on, the auctioneer is really putting a lot of pressure on everybody.
Saying, got another bid, another...
That
is not the time to be under pressure
time.
making decisions.
It is not the time to be working out whether you should spend a bit more on that house or not. This actually, honestly, this is the number one mistake I see people make all the time. It's very rare to go to auction and actually not see number of people make this mistake. It's really obvious to me.
And the body language is obvious.
Yeah.
The shifting, the looking at each other sideways.
Oops.
Slight shugging of the shoulder. I don't know. Should we go again?
Haven't thought about that.
Yeah. So setting a limit before you go to an auction, absolutely vital. Now let's go back to the question, because one of the things in there was about not being able to make a pre-auction offer. So let's just briefly go over a pre-auction offer versus going to public auction.
Yeah.
Some people like to throw a number out there, not really well thought out particularly. But in most cases, an agent is unlikely to accept a pre-auction offer if it has any conditions whatsoever. So the offer still needs to be unconditional and without a cooling off period.
Yeah.
So very important. Again, each state is different. So make sure you understand the difference in your state in terms of where you're purchasing. But it is important to know, if you do make a pre-auction offer, it doesn't give you more time to play with. You still will be probably in 98% of cases buying under auction conditions. But it is possible. But we would caution,
if you're
making
not
making a pre-auction offer if you haven't really thought through the strategy of what that pre-auction offer is going to be and what you're going to do if it's rejected.
So here's some problems with a pre-auction offer. One is, when you're at auction and it's a public auction, like literally public, you're there and you can see what the other buyers are offering.
Yeah.
They're there, right? They can see what you're offering. You can see and hear what they're offering. The minute you decide to buy a property before auction, you're going in blind, because you cannot see what those other buyers are or are not doing. You cannot truly believe what the agent is telling you about those other buyers and whether or not they're actually really there or not, whether they're really offering whatever price they're supposedly offering or not. You actually have no idea. And so this is what a lot of people fail to understand when they make a pre-auction offer. They fail to understand that, oh my God, I'm about to go into the hornet's nest, because I thought it was bad being at auction where I can actually see what everyone's doing, but now I'm doing it blind and I don't trust what the agent's telling me. Just think about it. How are you going to react when they say to you, okay, well, someone else has come in with a higher offer? Do you believe them? Do you call their bluff? Like, have you thought that through?
It can feel a little bit safer in some ways to some people, because no one's looking at you. No one knows it's you. It's just you and the agent, and the other people aren't actually there going, oh, well, that was a stupid offer. Geez, they're never going to buy it for that. Do you know what I mean? Like in a public auction, you kind of you feel a bit visible. You feel a little bit like you're under the spotlight. and if the reason that you're looking at making a pre-auction offer is you don't want to be in the spotlight, it's not a good reason. because
No.
all you're doing is taking away your advantage of being able to see what everyone else is doing. And if you're well informed and have your strategy laid out really well, then knowing what everyone else is doing is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing with pre-auction offers, if they're really easy, if the agent is encouraging you to make one, if it's really easy to make one, there's one of two things possibly happening here. One, you're the only buyer. And if you go to auction, you're going to be better off because that transparency works in your favor, right? You can see, and the agent knows you can see there are no other interested parties. So that's one risk with making a pre-auction offer, is that you're actually, you're denying yourself an advantage that you could have. And that does happen sometimes, not all the time, of course. Another thing to think about with a pre-auction offer is that often the agent will say, oh, of course I'm going to take a pre-auction offer from that person because they are head and shoulders above everybody else. And that is that person they know is the strongest bidder, the strongest buyer by far, and they know that there's daylight between what that person is prepared to pay and what the rest of the people that are interested in the property are prepared to pay. So you've got to be very careful with a pre-auction offer that you don't actually massively overpay because you feel safer, that nobody's looking at you, it's not in public, you don't think you're going to have competition. The only reason there's no competition is because you're already overpaid. So these are things you have to be really, really careful of.
The other thing that the agent uses pre-auction offers for, and it is common for agents to encourage pre-auction offers, if they feel that the owner is a little bit excessive in their expectations on price, they'll often use pre-auction offers to help educate the owner as to where the market is sitting in terms of its offers. So that means getting actual offers from buyers, and they're going to then potentially use that to educate the owner, right? So this is important because if that is what the agent is doing, and through conversations you can sometimes uncover these sorts of things, then it can be quite helpful to make a pre-auction offer that isn't going to buy the property.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that that is the intention of the agents and that they're not going to sort of push you aside and go, geez, that was too low, but this guy, he's on the money, we're going to sell it to him. So it is a very, very, very careful, you need to tread very carefully if you're making an offer to potentially help the agent educate the owner to bring their reserve back in line with where it probably should be. It is something that we do, but you need a lot of skill.
That's exactly what I was about to say. I think Meighan, you're going to dangerous territory. We're trying to encourage first home buyers to think like experienced buyers agents here.
Well, this is things you need to know because if you're up against a buyer's agent, that might actually be what they're doing. So I think it's important to know what can be done, but be very careful. If you haven't been through the full education process and you don't know what I'm talking about here, be careful using that approach.
Yeah. Do not use that tactic if you've just listened to this podcast. You need to do our program. You need to do the course.
No, this is opening your eyes, not giving you. This is not the pathway.
These are not
the roadmap.
tactics. Then of course you get to auction, right? You get to auction. It's all bets are off. All gloves are on, bets are off, whatever. You're there. It's happening, right? You haven't done the pre-auction route, you've set your limit, you're there, you get to look around at all the other buyers and you're going to find there's different characters at auction.
Yes.
Also, in different states, some states you need to register to bid, like in New South Wales and Queensland, but in Victoria you don't, and so there's, as we mentioned all the time, there are different rules all across the country. And in fact, in episode 127, we did actually interview buyer's agents across the country and we went through the auction things you need to be aware of in every state. So that's a reference you should definitely go back to. But there you are, you're bidding, all right? Or you're about to bid one way or the other and you're looking around and there's all sorts of characters you're going to be bidding up against. I mean, one of the favorite, I call them a testosterone bidder. They're not my favorite really. I hate them. There's sort of
interesting to watch. Let's put it that way.
It's very interesting to watch. You're going to see people that are shy and timid. You're going to see people, the testosterone bidder, for example, is usually really bolshy and really aggressive and tries to scare people. You're going to see people that are supported by their entire family. They've got that 3 generations all standing there supporting the bidder.
You get the guy that just turns up and goes, well, that looks all right.
It does happen, weirdly enough.
It does happen. One of the first auctions that I did as a selling agent, in Newmarket. The guy had gone out to get milk and he just turned up and he went, "Oh, I always liked this house," and he bought it. And he went home and told his wife afterwards. Now, you are not in a position to do that. They're a very different part of their life.
Do you not do that?
And there was no due diligence done. I can't even remember, honestly, whether it was a good buy, good property, had issues, anything. I couldn't tell you if he did the right thing or the wrong thing. But that is not the way to buy property, to just throw a dart and hope that it's going to be okay, because there are so many things that could go wrong.
Some people are very cavalier about buying property, and obviously we're not encouraging that type of behaviour at all. But, if the property turns out it is within budget, you're going to go to auction. Obviously, as we've said, you're going to be buying that under auction conditions if you're the successful bidder. And that means that you're the highest bidder and it's over reserve, or they've dropped the reserve to accommodate you. However, if you're the successful bidder, you're going to be buying it without a cooling off. So it does mean that all that prep work needs to be done before you turn up. So yes, you do have to get the contract looked at. At absolute bare minimum, you've got to get a strata report, building pest inspection. There's a lot of other due diligence to do as well, because
we talked about making sure the pricing was right. You understand where it sits in terms of its market value. We talked about doing a building and pest inspection, as you say, strata reports. There's a whole lot of other council searches that you need to do as well before you buy a property. So there are some sunk costs that you're going to have. That doesn't mean that you should still go ahead with the property if you find things that are wrong. Just because you spent money, it may be a good reason not to go ahead.
It's exactly right. And look, I think the other thing to understand, and this is where we're always banging on about, it's all different in every single state and territory in this country, and it is because in some states, the vendor has to disclose very little information to buyers. So it's really important that you know what's missing in your area so that you can check all of that out as well. And in fact, there's that whole series, which I mentioned episode 127 before, which is where we interview buyers agents from across the country to give insights into what the deal is in their state and territory, right? And so we covered things like that in terms of vendor disclosure as well in that series. So I would go back and listen to that whole lot, pull out the stuff that's relevant to your area.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this conversation started from a post, and the post basically indicated that the person felt a bit unsure about going to auction, and to bid or not to bid. And I think what we really encourage you to think about is not whether to bid or not to bid, but is that the right property for you? Is it within your price range? Can you do the right due diligence before the cutoff date? Do you understand the process that the agent is going to use in the lead up to, during the auction and after the auction? Now, we didn't go into that too much, but of course that's really important to understand along the way. So it's about understanding for yourself, is this the right property for you? And actually bidding at auction is just a different way of buying to having a private treaty negotiation. But it is an open, transparent way of buying. And so we would encourage you not to discount or reject the property simply because it's going to auction.
Absolutely. Now, I've actually got a book, because I wrote a book about auctions called Auction Ready. I'll put the link in the show notes. So, and in fact, I think there's a coupon there that will give you 30% off. Not I know. I'll add the coupon into the show notes to give you 30% off if you want to buy my book. But of course, if you actually buy our whole program and learn how to buy a property properly from go to woe, every step in the right order, you get the book for free. So
it does come with the program. It does. So a quick note. Good night.
No. Good night. A good night from him and a good night for me.
You might think that we cover everything you need to know in these podcasts, but a word of warning, we don't. We just scratch the surface here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
Our first home buyer guide course only costs $990, and you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations. You can also share the link of any property you're thinking of buying, and we can help you work out whether it's A, B, or C grade. Trust me, you'll buy better with our guidance, and you'll overpay a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. there is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.